Alright YouTube, this is a video about Iraq, and of course I'm using the new webcam. I'm still using this microphone because the built-in microphone's not quite as good. You can see the autofocus here. If you hold it still, see the autofocus? It's really good. You can see things much better. Now, autofocus is on. This is about Iraq though, so you can enjoy it in high def. You have to fiddle with your settings on YouTube to see it in high definition, by the way. Mine usually stays around 480p, because that's my connection speed. I can put it to 720 and watch it as long as I pause it for a minute, but that's about all. This story comes from the Telegraph, because things are getting worse apparently in Iraq, if that's at all possible. ISIS storms Saddam-era chemical weapons complex in Iraq, facility containing disused stores of sarin and mustard gas overrun by jihadist group. Apparently what happened is that there's a chemical weapons complex north of Baghdad. Now, I always assumed that we had destroyed the chemical weapons that we did find, as well as these facilities. I know we destroyed the mobile facilities, but apparently the ones that were, built into the sand dunes we somehow left alone. I always thought we got rid of these weapons. Apparently that's not the case, and now ISIS not only has American-made fighter jets, Apache helicopters, M1 Abrams tanks, various small arms and explosives, armored Humvees that were once belonging to the Iraqi military. Not only have their numbers now swelled from a few thousand to probably well over 10,000, now they have chemical weapons. Well, hooray. And now the Saudi Arabians take the extraordinary step of trying to assert dominance over the entire issue and tell the United States and UK don't get involved. Now, the Saudis are the ones that were arming ISIS. We all know that. It's an open secret that that was happening. They were the ones funding them. The United States giving funding to the FSA, all those weapons and all that money got into the hands of ISIS, which makes us at least semi-complicit, although I don't think that it was the intent to arm ISIS. I think it was a happy coincidence on behalf of the warmongers, if you can put it that way. But the Saudis are the ones in charge of ISIS, and they're trying to form a satellite state out of northern Syria, northern Iraq, and probably part of southeastern Turkey. Now they've got chemical weapons, which means that now, if they use them, or if we think that they'll use them, or if anyone suspects that they'll be used, especially against the Israelis, it's going to turn into an all-out world war situation probably, because everyone in this region will start fighting everybody else. The Iranians will march in, the Turks will march in, the Saudi Arabians will start flying their bombers, the Egyptians will get restless, Israel will certainly be ordering all of its hitmen out to assassinate people, and the US will inevitably get involved on behalf of our allies in the region, or our so-called allies, because the Turks are the only ones that actually don't stab us in the back on a constant basis. Meanwhile, the Russians will lean on the Iranians and the Syrian government through Assad to do more. And you'll have a massive, massive die-off of people in this region because everyone will be flinging high explosives and thermobarics and things at each other. And it'll be horrible. And part of the reason it's gotten as bad as it is simply that the Iraqi military, when they were faced with a force that they could have easily outgunned, simply didn't have the will to fight. Well, as soon as people on the streets, specifically in the Sunni areas, which are the ones ISIS is controlling, as soon as they saw that the Iraqi military wasn't willing to fight, they said, well, I guess it's all gone to hell now, I might as well support ISIS. We are the ones, the United States, our government, trained these people, armed them, gave them all this good equipment, and then they fail to actually fight a foe that's trying to take over part of their country. It's a sad day when people that are trained by the US military apparently don't actually know how to fight. Meanwhile, ISIS, which also was apparently trained by the United States, at least their higher-ups in a camp in Jordan, nonetheless, apparently they're doing quite well. And now they have Saddam-era chemical weapons. Well, the thing is, supposedly they can't actually fit it on artillery or anything to use it. That's wonderful, but they could still drop one of these canisters strapped with explosives out of an Apache helicopter. They could probably figure out some way to deliver it long range. If not, then they'll do what terrorists have always done with such weapons, like in Madrid. They'll simply strap it onto the back of a truck with some explosives inside, and they'll cart it into Baghdad and set it off on a busy street, and thousands or tens of thousands of people will suddenly convulse and die, and those that don't die will be crippled for life and won't be able to move their limbs, and they'll be shitting their pants for the rest of their lives. It's gotten to the point where now this area has become a free-for-all. We're getting reports that there are people from like Denmark and Britain joining ISIS. There are people from here in the United States that joined Assad's forces and joined the other side with the FSA. There are people pouring into this region from literally all corners of the earth, and it's almost like nothing you've ever seen before. And meanwhile, the media is split between those that want war and those that want more war. Those that want war back Obama. They want Obama to send troops in and stop ISIS. Those who want even more war want him to expand the field to Syria and probably beat up on the Iranians too. And that's exactly what we see. Our politicians and our media right now have forsaken common sense, and there are very few groups at all that are saying just stay out of it. Most of them are saying get involved to a lesser or greater extent. I mean, it's fascinating to watch their total warmongering and watch the same people that used to complain about Bush being a warmonger back Obama. But what he is suggesting will lead to war. Can you imagine? We put these people in the embassy in Baghdad, supposedly safe. What happens if ISIS rolls up a truck a block away and blows it up with a ton of sarin in it and vaporizes the sarin, and it floats through the air on the currents and kills everybody in the embassy? What happens? What will we do? If several hundred American souls die, people over here, because they're sheepish, will say, well, this is a grave inconvenience and we must now go to war. Which is probably what these people want in the beginning anyway. They want, I guess the idea is stimulate the economy by waging another limited war, as though that worked under Bush. It's ludicrous what they're gearing up to do. Meanwhile, we've got Russian tanks in the Ukraine. We've got continuing unrest in Thailand. We've got protests going on in Turkey. We've got all sorts of destabilization literally all over the world. The governments are getting out of hand. They're getting less and less common sense and more no sense and nonsense, to the point where it doesn't even matter anymore whether your government's far right or far left. It's just as bad. None of them know what they're doing. And the ones in the Middle East are the worst of all. They're getting more and more theocratic. The Saudis never stop being theocrats. Turkey's moving towards theocracy. At least some groups, Erdogan's groups, want the country to adopt a more Islamo-friendly stance, whereas the secularists and the nationalists are saying no, but they're apparently outnumbered by Erdogan's fake votes. Tayyip there. Syria's still in civil war. Iraq's falling apart. Is there any area in the entire region that's stable? The most stable country in the Middle East right now is Iran. And that's not a good sign for this general area of the world. And the problem is, this is the fueling depot of the world that's been fought over for decades now. If the Middle East erupts into a total chaos, it will involve all major players worldwide. The United States will enter these areas. The Russians will send troops. There will be European forces in the region. Will especially be stationed in Turkey, which is, I guess, marginally safer because they're in NATO. Other than that, who else are we going to defend? The Israelis, which stab us in the back constantly, but, AIPAC keeps us in there anyway. We'll end up probably defending the Saudis, which I don't think we should waste a drop of American blood defending the Saudi Arabians, considering how hideous their government is. Maybe defend the people by overthrowing the House of Saud at some point. Everything basically from Cairo to Karachi is falling apart right now. You just had today as well Taliban groups along the Afghan-Pakistani border attack a bunch of NATO field trucks, and they destroyed something like 28 different trucks, butchered a whole bunch of people, and there's more destabilization there too. It's no longer even just in the Middle East, it's the entire Islamic world. It extends into Central Asia, where Islam is also dominant. It's now starting to affect the relations between Pakistan and India as well, and those relations have always been strained. It's getting worse. Egyptian relations between Egypt and the United States and Egypt and Russia are sketchy at best. It's gotten to the point, it's so weird now, that the United States and Iran are now almost kind of sort of on the same side in an actual conflict. That's something we haven't seen since the dawn of the Cold War. the entire area is functionally falling apart. In the most simple of terms, it's engulfed in chaos. It's civil war, but it's civil war now that is going across borders. It was in Syria. And we had the Arab Spring, so-called, that Obama laughed about so much, and actually it was a disaster, especially in Egypt and almost in Tunisia as well. In North Africa, the center of North Africa, it's not even part of the Middle East. It overthrew the Egyptian government. There are continual problems there. It was in Syria, and now it's spread back to Iraq, where we were in the beginning. The first of the Middle East countries that in recent times we've meddled with. It's come full circle and gone right back to the beginning. We are now right back where we started in 2003, more than a decade ago. We're now right back where we started. We've come full circle and we're going through another horrible cycle of war. And we'll end up in Syria probably, and thousands of people will die there. And then we'll be defending Israel for no reason, because they don't offer us anything. Meanwhile, the government will still give lukewarm approval to a Palestinian state that will never actually form until Israel gets new leadership, preferably someone that isn't a total nationalist, because Israeli nationalism is the only nationalism allowed on this planet without calls of racism. The Saudis, meanwhile, will defend them even though they stab us in the back too, and they're the ones arming these groups. All of these militant groups are Saudi-backed. Half of their fighters are probably from Saudi Arabia. You don't hear about it in the media, though, because we get oil from them, so we're not allowed to criticize Saudi Arabia. I criticize them. They're a brutal theocracy, a totalitarian state, and a theocratic state. And yet, even though they're everything we supposedly are against, we're somehow their best bosom buddies. The area's falling apart, and now these militants have chemical weapons. Well, I wonder who else they might sell them to. I'm sure that they'll just stay in this factory and they won't move them anywhere. There are hundreds of tons of nerve agents in there, but they're not going to sell some to the FSA to use against Assad. They're not going to sell it to Hezbollah to take care of Israel. They're not going to ship some of it back to, Saudi Arabia to use against whatever nation they want to attack. They're not going to give them to the Iranians. You'd be surprised, even though these are Sunni militias. They'll do business with the Shiites if they think they'll get a good price for it. Oh, I wonder who else they might give it to. Maybe the Chechen rebels. Maybe get Russia stirred up. Maybe they'll ship some into the European Union and just start setting it off in major cities like they did in Madrid. They've done it before. Why wouldn't they do it now? They've got better weapons now. They've got more money now. They've got more fighters than ever before. We've essentially seen Al-Qaeda and its associated groups grow from relatively humdrum, where their biggest accomplishment was a one-off taking the United States by surprise, into a group that has gathered steadily more support over time, and our own governments are using this as an excuse to crack down on dissidents, right here in the good old United States and over in Europe. Now, if you remember, people are clamoring to call the other side of the political spectrum, if that's what you can call it, terrorists. There was a post on Facebook today by progressives, forward progressives, or some left group saying, oh, the Tea Party should be declared domestic terrorists. I've seen the same thing spoken of about leftists. People have forsaken common sense to the point where now they're taking a leaf out of the book of the worst theocratic authoritarian states in the Middle East and trying to apply that logic to domestic politics. They're actually clamoring to be more like the third world. That's how far we've come, America. That people here in this country and in the other developed parts of the world, in Western Europe and Canada, are now simply trying to label everyone they don't like, everyone they disagree with, as a terrorist. Which is a monumental failure of judgment. It's a terrible idea. It doesn't have any legal basis anyway. It's not rational. It's senseless, and yet it's being done by all of these different groups, left and right and center. Well, this doesn't make sense. To the point where now even the most nutty of conspiracy theorists are right half the time because things really are that bad. To the point where, you've got these cults hoping the aliens will come down and destroy the world just so that we don't have to keep suffering under the yoke of idiots. These people are morons. And yet if you come out and challenge these people, then you're probably a domestic terrorist too. You know, you're too far right, you're too far left, you're not multicultural enough, you're too multicultural, you're too tolerant, you're too intolerant, you're too racist, while you're too open towards other races, you're a traitor. You know, everyone's a traitor too. Apparently, if they call out Obama, they're a racist traitor. If they talk badly about Bush, then they're a liberal traitor. Everyone's a traitor and a terrorist. Apparently, it's gotten to the point where now everyone apparently is guilty of these crimes because the threshold has been lowered so far to be labeled a terrorist that you can, you know. It used to be you rob a liquor store, you get thrown in the slammer. Now you rob a liquor store, you'd probably get thrown in Gitmo. We've given the government that right through our own stupidity, apparently. And through constantly being afraid because the media wants to portray the world as fallen, evil, chaotic, and ultimately inhospitable towards everybody possible. Because it makes for good news. It's really exciting. And it's sad to see what's happening in the Middle East because you know now that they have chemical weapons, they're going to try to use them. They might accidentally gas themselves trying to, but they're going to at least try to use these weapons. And you can guarantee the Saudis would be more than happy to give them the ability to retrofit them and make them more functional. Oh, the Saudis would do that for a few pennies. They robbed $500 million from banks in Mosul. They've got plenty of money right now. They can get a couple of sarin bombs going, I'm sure. And then they can attack Israel, and they can attack Jordan, and they can attack Turkey, and Iran, and they can attack Baghdad, and they'll probably set some off in Europe too, just like these crazy theocratic militants have always done and always will. So the region basically now is useless. We might as well leave it alone and let these people gas one another. Because now there's a couple 100 tons of sarin floating around in the Middle East. It sounds like it's gotten a lot safer. Don't you think? Obama's done such a good job, and Bush before him did too, at making this area so safe and hospitable and stable. I think not. That's about all. Peace out.